So I'm Lottie, I'm producer at Failbetter Games. I've been in the industry for around 2.5 years now. I started out in advert games for my sins and joined Failbetter Games last year. And today I want to talk to you about, as Kate said, porting Fallen London to mobile. So, does that work? Oh my god, it does. Okay, so first and foremost, who are these schmoes? Who are Failbetter Games? Well, we are best known as a narrative-focused game studio. So we love text, we love excellent writing, and we marry that with beautiful 2D art. As of Friday, we are going to live in a church, a spooky 1890s church in North Greenwich, which is great, super on brand, because we love Gothic Victorian games like these. But obviously I want to talk about Fallen London first and foremost. So just so I can gauge the talk, can everyone who has either heard of or played Fallen London put up their hand? Okay. Woo! So many. That's great. So for those of you who haven't heard of it or played it, it is a literary RPG set in an alternative Victorian London which has sunk beneath the surface, now inhabits a vast sunless chasm ruled over by the traitor Empress Queen Victoria and a sentient marketplace known only as the Bazaar, because art. So this didn't actually start out that way. It started out in 2009 as a much smaller Twitter-based game and was relaunched in 2012 under the aegis Fallen London. As of today, it makes around £500,000 in revenue a year. It has a monthly active user base of around 30,000 people. And it uses something that I call courteous free-to-play, which basically means that we offer you guys a bunch of nice things to buy if you like, but we really try not to be annoying about it. We try not to push you, because that's important to us. So the things that you can buy are the kind of normal premium currency purchases, but we also have something called Exceptional Friendship, which is a monthly subscription service, which means that people get a monthly bunch of perks if they subscribe. And it also means that as a business model, we have a pretty good idea of what money is coming in each month. So that's really cool. So at this stage, you might be thinking, well, that's great, that's kind of jammy. Why did you guys decide that you were gonna port to mobile then? And that would be a good question. And it's basically this dude's fault. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He is one of the co-founders of PopCap. He made Bejeweled and he made Peggle, so I guess like he knows what he's doing or whatever. And he came to us and he turned out to be a massive Fallen London fan, which is awesome. And he said, I love your game, but why isn't it on mobile? Which was a good question. And we got talking and he put in a bit of money in the end to get the project started. So we knew that because it was a free-to-play game, it was going to be suited to the mobile market because everyone loves a free-to-play mobile game. People had been asking about it. At this stage, Fallen London had been active and been popular for around 5 to 6 years. So people had consistently said, I really like your game. I wish I could take it out and about with me. And this was an opportunity to increase our player base and obviously our revenue, which is great. So the aims of this port essentially were, we really wanted to increase our audience. As a narrative studio, it's very difficult for us to localize. For example, there are over 1.5 million words in Fallen London. So localization costs are large. And we also update the game every month. So these localization costs would continue throughout the life cycle of the project, which as far as I'm concerned is like indefinite. So we're talking a lot of money. So anything that can increase our audience in English-speaking countries is really cool for us. So mobile was great. We also wanted to have the same experience across the browser game and the mobile game. So we wanted a backwards and cross-compatible port, which was ambitious. And we also wanted to plant our Failbetter flag in mobile. So we'd done this with Sunless Sea. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It was a real boon for the company. It did quite well. And we were really proud of it, even though it was a risk. It was our first Steam game. And we wanted to do the same on mobile. So we were faced with a couple of problems before we started, even though now we knew that we wanted to make a port. Firstly, this game, Fallen London, had been out there for 6 years at this point. So it had grown, it had morphed. The content had increased, but also the features had increased. So we were stuck with a pretty considerably sized non-mobile code base that we had to pick up and put onto mobile somehow. We also had a bunch of web-specific features. So in the original Fallen London, we make a lot of use of mouse overs, for example, that you can't translate immediately onto mobile. We had never made a mobile game before. That was pretty key. And we also had to worry about the fact that no longer did we only concern ourselves with the bunch of browsers that people could play it on. We had to worry about the iOS suite and, terrifyingly, the Android suite, which I don't even want to talk about. And finally, as a browser game, we expected our players always to have internet. It relied on the fact that you always had internet. And that is, that's something you can't rely on for mobile games. So we had to consider that too. So bearing in mind that this hasn't launched yet, and shameless self-promotion, it launches in 2 weeks, on the 19th of April. Everyone should download it, it's great. So this hasn't been proven, but I think genuinely we made a bunch of really good decisions that hopefully mitigated these issues. The first of which was we decided to make a hybrid app. This meant we could reuse a lot of the core business logic, which was great, and it also meant we could reuse a lot of our web experience, because for the last 5 to 6 years we've been making a web game, so this all made sense. We also sensibly hired a guy who did have mobile experience. Top tip. We also did a bunch of design before we started coding. So we wanted to make sure that the mobile experience felt as native as possible, even though we were making a hybrid app. We didn't want it to feel like we just picked up this old game and pushed it on mobile. We wanted users to have a great experience. And we decided sensibly to go iOS first, meaning that we're launching only on the App Store first, and that means we only need to worry about the iOS suite. We don't need to be alarmed by the Android guys. And if that all goes well, we will launch on Android, but we want to make sure that there's an appetite for Fallen London on mobile. And we also want to make sure that the game is really, really secure on iOS. So if we do launch on Android, we don't need to worry about iOS. We can just focus on Android. So that's good. Bearing in mind, we're a pretty small studio. We're only 16 people. And finally, and probably most importantly, we decided to practice because we hadn't done this before. So we went into beta at the end of last year, and we soft launched at the start of this year. And so now when we're launching in the next 2 weeks, we feel pretty confident that we know what we're doing and it's going to go okay. However, as Kate implied, it wasn't the easiest of rides. There are a couple of menaces that continued throughout the project, and I imagine they would recur if you were also doing a port of an existing game to mobile. So the first one was just that we were really ambitious. A totally backwards compatible mobile experience is hard. End of. Another one is specs. You might think in a port you have an existing game that you can just say, well, I want that on mobile. But if you have a game that is currently live and currently changing every month with updated content and tweaked features, actually you don't have an existing spec. You have to sit down and analyze every single feature and think, is that the feature that I wanted originally, or has it changed? Is that feature appropriate for the platform that I'm now thinking about? And is there anything I want to do now artistically or design-wise for this new port? Because obviously it is new, and that's exciting. So you're constantly in a sort of design cycle throughout production. Also, as producer, this is close to my heart, it's difficult to do a properly agile port of an existing game to mobile. And this is because the great thing about agile is you prioritize stuff. So you say, this stuff over here, this is the stuff that has to be in the game, and this stuff down here, these are nice to haves. And that means as you go through development, if you run out of time or money or something goes wrong, you can cut these things at the bottom, and you still end up with a game that everyone's happy with. On porting, when you're porting an existing game to mobile, you don't really have the luxury of being able to cut something, especially if you want, like us, to have exactly the same experience across both platforms. Because if I decide that actually we don't want this feature, that's going to feel very different if we currently have it in the browser game. So that's a little bit more restrictive than it would be normally. And finally, ports aren't that sexy. Everyone knows it. Everyone wants to work on a new game, and it's very often that you'll get devs who actually feel a little bit demoralized having worked on a port because they want to be doing new things, and they did this once already, and why are they doing it now? Also, because we were using or reusing a lot of the code base that we already had, a lot of the tasks are the kind of complicated, niggly integration tasks that take a lot longer, and the reward is a lot smaller, even if you do a really good job. So a lot of our devs were prone to being a bit, I'm not really enjoying this, and it's very important that you have someone there to remind them of why this is an exciting thing and why you're doing a port in the first place. And for the record, I think the game is really great. It's really revolutionized Fallen London. And you'll all know that, because you'll all download it. You promised. However, having just totally convinced you not to port ever, there are some really, really good things that we only discovered because we decided to port. For example, our community. So who here has made or launched a mobile game, or is thinking about it? Okay, cool, so a fair few. So you will be terrified of launch, because on mobile, it's all about the launch, it's all about the visibility. So the best thing that can happen to you, if you're targeting the App Store, for example, is to get an Apple feature, because that ensures that you get visibility, and that gives you a really good chance of getting a lot of downloads and therefore making a bunch of money, which is great. That's really hard to do. No one really knows how to do it. You can't really bank on it. So the second best thing that can happen to you on mobile, on launch, is to have, say, 30,000 monthly active users who you know like the game, who you know are interested in it, who you know are likely to leave you good reviews and also tell everyone about it. So this makes launching into a really scary market a lot less scary. So if you have an existing game and a porting, do use that community. Another thing which sounds kind of small, but is super important, is we've just learned a hell of a lot. So now we can go into any other mobile project that we decide to do as a development studio, having done it before, and I think having done it really well. So this is super key. One thing about porting is it gives you new restrictions, and it makes you look at your existing game in a different way. So you often find that because you're restricted by, for example, the size of a screen being a lot different on a phone than it is to a browser, you actually have to work with that restriction and think about features in a different way that you didn't have to think about in the original. And that means you come up with different solutions that are often actually a lot cooler and a lot better than you originally came up with. So you can come up with new exciting ways of doing your game or improving your game through something like a port. And finally, and this is quite close to my heart, even though again it sounds small, we have set a precedent. We are the world's first game, wait for it, to include auto-renewable subscriptions on the App Store. I know, you're all thinking this is the best thing ever. And it kind of is. So previously, games were not allowed subscriptions on the App Store. That didn't end. You could subscribe to a game for a set period of time, like for 6 months or whatever. And after that time, you would be automatically unsubscribed. Whereas the way that we work with Exceptional Friendship that I mentioned earlier is an ongoing subscription until you decide you don't want it. And that is great because it's more secure from a business perspective. And it's what we already do. It's a tried and tested method, and it works for us. So it was really, really key for us that we continued this onto the App Store, even though technically, legally, we probably couldn't do it. So we basically convinced Apple and begged them and finally managed to get them to say yes. So we're the first people to do it, which is not only cool because we can say we set a precedent, but it's also cool because if any of you guys are thinking of making a content-focused or narrative game on mobile, you may well be able to use this now too, because the precedent has been set. And again, that wouldn't have happened had we not done a port. So, in terms of what you guys take away, I would say one of the most important things of a port is make sure that you have a really clear business objective. The technical approach that you take will entirely be based on what you want to achieve. We had some pretty clear objectives, so we had some pretty clear technical approaches, and that was super useful. Be prepared to constantly look at your existing game and be pretty mean about it. As I said, if you have an existing game, it's likely that it has changed since you first made it, and it may well have changed for the better, but those changes may not be appropriate for your new platform, or they may have changed slightly differently to the way you intended it, because that's just organic. So you need to be prepared to cut a bunch of stuff, to rethink a bunch of stuff, and not be too precious about the original, even though you love it to pieces. Community are everything. If you have an existing game, you will have an existing community. They are your biggest fans. They can help you with things like beta because they know your game super, super well, and they really care about it. And as I said, they're also incredibly useful for mobile launches. Please make sure that you have at least one person in your team who is devoted to making sure that the developers are okay, because they will get sad, and nobody likes a sad developer. And finally, and most importantly, just practice. On mobile, it's so important to make that launch really count. It's so easy to go wrong. You don't have to be stupid. Nothing disastrous has to happen. It's just such a complicated thing that the most that you can do to practice is always good. So that's me. And oh look, it's launching. So everyone should do that. Thank you very much.